Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all having wonderful days. Let's head into collectively rewilding. All right, here we are, ready for class today. It has been a very weather-filled week today, or this week, so we haven't been out in the garden a ton. I did manage to get the the larger berm and swale system pretty well completed up until we get the sprinkler line portion started. And I'm trying to create this post for you guys, but it just will not finish. I've been building this highlight video for about 3 days now, I think, and it just won't complete. So I'm gonna have to come up with a different way to share that information with you and walk you through the different steps that I took in completing the swale up to the point of being ready for sprinkler or irrigation systems. Now, we can go back in there and take a quick peek at that, just so you can see. This is where it started, right? Here is the close-up on that. And you can see it's pretty rough in here, not very graded. A little further in, just all kind of messy. Some of the chunks have fallen in from the sides, etc. So I shoveled all of that down and got it pretty well smoothed out. It wasn't about being perfect, but you can see it's a lot more uniform and a lot more ready for anything coming on top of it. It's not big chunks of dried dirt and things there. So then the next step was to lay down the wood chips, and I covered all of the swale with those wood chips. The entire thing didn't take much. It only took probably a little less than 2 full bags. And then added the rocks into that so that it's going to help hold the form of it. We'll see how these work out. This wasn't my original intention, but my husband's done a lot of dirt work with the shovel and things like that. I've done work with the soil as a gardener, not in shaping the soil so much. So we're working together to bring this into its best creation, and it's always a little bit of a back and forth working out what we think is the best situation. He actually had wanted to fill the entire thing with rocks to really hold that structure. What I pointed out, though, is that we're looking more at like the way a drainage ditch is shaped. When you look at a drainage ditch out in the country, there is nothing to hold that shape. Now it's broader, that drainage ditch will be broader, but all we're looking for here is a dip down in, and then I want all of the soil to have ground cover on it. And that will help it to keep its structure. If anything, it'll slowly become more rounded and a little less steep, a more gradual incline. That's all wonderful, but I want to be able to plant things here. And if we filled this entire swale up with rocks, that would be very impractical. So we'll see if this will work with the plants going forward, this one single layer of rocks to help shape the overall, or to keep the overall definition of that swale. And that was all that we did pretty much this week. You can tell how many of the rocks I used out. This thing was higher and it came all the way out to about here. And so that was a lot of rocks, which is nice. We're definitely going to be continuing to use the rocks, so we don't need them to disappear, but having them moving into the actual garden formations instead of just this huge pile of useless rocks back behind the garden shed is nice. This is one of the ground covers that we're actually considering for the garden here next year at Collectively Rewilding. We won't be able to put it in at all this year. Red creeping thyme, they have multiple colors. I would look at various colors, and I would never go with a monoculture. Neither the grass nor just the thyme. I would want to break that up with some other types of ground cover to keep the biodiversity, as well as getting that pest protection and all of those beautiful benefits that go along with biodiversity. That's one of the things that we're actually going to talk about tonight is biodiversity. And I believe I've shared this article with you. I went through a ton yesterday to get it off of my list and get it out there where you guys could make use of it. No, it doesn't look like I have put up that most recent article, unless there's just so many that it's not putting it up towards the top, which this algorithm sometimes does do that. All right. That would be either in sustainable or organic soil regeneration. Take a quick peek here. Collectively rewilding home, possibly rewilding news around the world. Some of these pieces can be in a couple of different areas there. Some of the time I even put them in both areas. I recently did one on desert ground covers, and I placed it in the desert states as well as in collectively rewilding overall. Let's see, that's the organic farming. That's not the article that I'm specifically looking for. So I don't know if we just didn't post it or if algorithms aren't finding it. I won't take any more time to try to figure that out. But what they're basically saying is that biodiversity doesn't always equal the results that we're looking for. That's all of this organic farming. And many times the reason that they say it's not working is because people are going out into undeveloped lands, claiming those developed lands, and then developing them into organic farming. Obviously, that is not ideal. My thoughts are to transition already existing farmland where practicable into organic farming, as well as reclaiming land that has been developed but essentially abandoned. There is a lot of that the world over. So if we take those spaces that have been abandoned and reclaim them where they've already had developing, they're not the natural state anymore, instead of encroaching into our wildland. That to me seems very doable, very logical, and a complete solution to one of the main problems that they're seeing when it's regarding organic farming. It's not always the practices themselves, it's the fact that people are taking wildland and turning that into organic farming instead of utilizing land that's already been developed. They also talk about production scale, how much can be harvested from a smaller area using organic methods rather than the big ag monoculture, the machinery, the GMOs, the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides. All of these things means death in a bottle, right? And it's never going to completely. So when you see something like an herbicide, it doesn't just get rid of your dandelions. It attacks the good and bad bugs that eat it as well. There is death in that plant when you put an aside. Fungicide, herbicide, genocide. Those all have ICIDE at the end. And those things mean death. So they're saying that those types of big ag protocols create a larger amount of produce. My argument to that is if we started taking back control of our own food supplies, getting communities involved, having the farmers working more towards selling their produce locally. I've talked about this and I'll never stop using it as the perfect example. My friend buying oranges in California from Florida while talking on the phone with her friend in Florida buying California oranges. Not only is that a waste of resources, it also is damaging to the produce itself. The further it has to be transported, the more it's going to be handled, the more damage it takes on, and the earlier that it has to be picked before it's completely ripe. I think when we look at all of these things and we really work to find actionable, practical solutions, it will be taking the majority of our food back into our own communities. We can generally even grow things like bananas here in Utah, or what would be a good example from a colder region? Molasses trees. You know, if you really wanted to be able to produce molasses in a hotter region, you could create an indoor environment to do that. That's probably less practical. That's where it's a different prospect to import, whether from in our own country through different states or an external country, that's where it's more reasonable. I don't know that coffee beans grow very well outside of their natural environment. The herbs that are used, especially for essential oil, they can be grown in a lot of places. However, those that generally have the most potency are grown where they originated. Frankincense is a good example of that. Biblical oil, right? It is from somewhere in that Mid-Eastern region that frankincense originally grew as a plant. That's where it's native. And so while they can grow frankincense in other places and collect the essential oils out of it, absolutely, and it will have benefit, it will not have the same chemical structure to its essential oils as it will in, maybe it's Tibet. I can't remember. It's somewhere over in that general area, Russia, China, the Middle East, Thailand, somewhere in one of those areas is where frankincense originated. And so when it grows in the environment that it originated with the soils and the pests, yes, pests definitely affect our plant life. In fact, essential oils are in the plant to begin with many times to protect or encourage different bug life, okay? And so those essential oils in that frankincense plant are going to have the most of the desirable properties we want in a frankincense oil than any grown outside of that region. And so there are certain things that, yes, we may want to import or export because it's not logistical for it to grow in other areas. But anywhere can grow tomatoes, anywhere can grow watermelon, anywhere can grow apple trees. You may have to make some modifications. Here in Utah, we can't grow the same types of apples that might proliferate in California or Florida. They have obviously warmer growing zones. But within reason, most of the common foods that we eat, even things like bananas, can be grown in an indoor grow. So we don't need to keep looking outside of our local communities for the majority of our fruits and vegetables. We need to take our local food systems back. We will have healthier communities. We will have healthier produce because they won't be handled as much and they won't have to be transported as far, and they can be picked later in the ripening stage, more towards optimal ripeness. All of these pieces, our farmers will be, if we are keeping our food systems local and food chain supply issues, or we have these import-export tariff issues that we're dealing with right now. You can have regional disasters. For instance, the pepper that is so loved in, oh my gosh, it's one of my daughter's favorite sauces, and I can't think of it right now, but it's one of the most common Hispanic style sauces, and it couldn't be purchased. Sriracha, and she actually used it in her Oriental food, but it was grown in Mexico, and they could not, for an entire season, could not grow this specific type of pepper. And I promise you, people were losing their minds paying $60 a bottle for this stuff. My daughter paid at least like $40 a bottle for some alternatives for it. We're going to have to be working with things like that, finding alternatives for our favorite things if they're a little more selective and it's hard for them to grow in these extreme weather conditions, and taking it back to a local level is where a lot of our food security can be handled. If we know our suppliers and our growers, think about knowing what style of interventions they use from their own communications with you. Do they spray all the time? Do they spray as little as possible? Do they avoid chemical sprays and go towards the more organic or non-processed style of treatment? As we've talked about, things like urea, which is produced in a lab, is simply a lab-produced variation of essentially urine, which is absolutely something that can be utilized in the garden to replenish the nutrients for your soil. We have articles about it. You need to do it safely. We're not just going to go out and willy-nilly throw it everywhere. But there are ways to utilize what is called urea in the agricultural world, and is essentially broken down urine, now though created synthetically in a lab. It doesn't have the same amount of benefits that natural urea has, and it has negative consequences that the natural urea doesn't have. We need to start looking at what has been done in our past, and yes, modernizing it a little bit. We're not just going to go out and stand as a man and go all over the garden. We're going to collect it and get it heated to a certain degree, and then it's ready to go into the garden. And that gets rid of those pathogens that they weren't aware of and didn't know how to avoid when they were using these natural methods. So now we can use these natural methods and have them be even safer. And I did. This one was a shock to me, folks. I thought that omnivore and predator excrement, scat, whatever one wants to call it, feces, had to decompose for a period of 7 years before it was safe to use on the garden. They're reevaluating this, apparently. It's still a little scary to me. I would love to have been able to do it in the 7-year process and make that a reasonable process for people to do. I'm a little nervous about how it's described. I definitely encourage you to jump in. I've provided not only this little video by this humorous gentleman that's pleasant to watch and discuss how he utilizes it in the garden, sharing his brand new garden that didn't have any extra decomposition time, made out of human manure. Very interesting. Then I put up a doc for you all so that you could tear through it like I did. I wanted to know more than this funny guy in his hat telling me it's okay to, well, eat shit. Excuse me. That's just what we're talking about. And it's called night soil. And all of my life, it has been warned against, warned against, warned against. You cannot use night soil. You cannot use night soil. You cannot use night soil. Apparently, they're reevaluating this. And I do have some .gov and .edu links in here for you to check that out. Here's the EPA.gov to just bam, start it off. Then there's this humanure.com that apparently is one of the best sources online in order to learn about this process. The research in how well the plants do in this humanure, the environmental benefits, and the social and cultural aspects. Because just like eating bugs or even using simple urine, which is called urea and has a very established modern and current practice in a synthetic form, we don't have humanure as synthetic. So it's a whole new area of icky that's part of overcoming the hesitations whenever one broaches things like this, eating bugs, using one's urine, when they talk about doing things like, I had another good example. An example from my childhood, they told us eggs were wonderful, then they told us don't eat eggs, now we can eat eggs again, right? So social and cultural aspects, it takes a minute for society to accept something so far-reaching and, well, a little icky, right? So definitely a worthy topic to tear through, as the gentleman in our cute little video talks about. Certainly even for us, where we're right next to the edge or the end of developed land, it's still not appropriate for us to consider utilizing human excrement in our gardening because we're not in the country. We're in a residential area. We have a neighbor right next door, another neighbor right next door, and an actual apartment complex behind our backyard. So we're definitely not able to explore this in the location that we currently are. However, for those of you who are out in the country, we would love to support you on this process, help you to do it safely if you're interested, and hear how you feel about the experiment. So definitely let us know if you're going to take this very dirty journey. So definitely kind of an interesting topic. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Let's see if Benny's saying anything about it in the chat there. No, nothing yet. What do you guys think about that? Please feel free to just open up your mics and speak up. No thoughts at all? Everybody's just totally comfortable with it. They're out in the country, they're going to go build an outhouse and start working on it. This is just something they're interested in.
On the pea, can you hear me?
Yes.
On the pea, I heard that it's good to keep the coyotes away and stuff.
Yeah, it actually does deter pests, deer, and rabbits, squirrels, coyotes. Mm-hmm.
I never knew why it wasn't used, because I mean, manure is manure, right?
Out of my ears.
Well, what I had always understood is that omnivore and
It is looking possible.
let's see, oh that there we go. Okay, I'm not sure what that background noise is. That herbivore, wait, omnivore and carnivore. There we go. Omnivore and carnivorous excrement had to biodegrade for at least 7 years before it was safe to grow plants in. That was the common knowledge all of my life, in fact. Urine being different, that has always been something I've pretty well been aware of can have a place in the garden. However, excrement was just a new level that I thought it had a place in 7 years, right? And that's not what this topic is telling us. This topic is telling us that you can use it more like cow or chicken manure.
Mm-hmm.
And that just, to me, was completely shocking. Not that you couldn't use it eventually, that you could use it so quickly, right? Down in South American nations, in the rainforest, the tribal peoples from millennia ago, and even up until today, for those who are still able to be in their lands and practicing their normal daily lives, created these spurs that would come out from their villages, and it would have all of their compostables, including human waste. And they wouldn't utilize it right away. They would move in, like they'd deplete their village area, and then they move further on those spurs, and then it would be ready for them to utilize. But again, that was a time delay, right? And so that's what I had always understood, as that just like meat, dairy, these types of things, it takes 7 years of decomposition to be able to use it in our soil. But that's just not turning out to be the case. And so, is this Kendez?
Yes.
I thought so. Hello. Good to hear from you. And so this really wasn't shocking to you. You think it's like the moment, kind of almost.
Well, yeah, because any instruments is already something like it's decomposing, but it's kind of like heightened because of the bacteria in the stomach and going through like somebody's system.
It absolutely is. You're absolutely correct. Another part of that same sort of thought process is, so when a cow, as an example, is chewing its cud, they just kind of stand there and they just chew on the grass and pieces of that fall out of their mouth. If we take a bite of an apple and then throw the core on the ground, the saliva, it's the same kind of a thing. It starts that decomposition process, and it's actually really good for the soil to have that interaction with foods that have had exposure to our saliva as well. Really fun. All right, well, thank you, Kendez. Anyone else? It's a kind of controversial topic, a little bit shocking. Nobody else has any thoughts on it? All right. Well, I hope you're all seriously considering the benefits. And that way, if these conversations come out in our communities where it can be made more approachable for residential usage as well as the country usage as discussed in this video, maybe we'll all be a little more open-minded to it, right? I encourage you to dive into the science in your little doc here. It was really interesting, and it was really reassuring to see that the government is aware of this and they're not arguing. I don't always just believe any source, government or otherwise, but getting that confirmation on something you think is probably viable, but you want some additional opinions and research, having that .gov is a bit of a reassurance there. And there's a lot of information, especially in this humanure.com. This is the handbook here. There is just an amazing amount of information on making this a reality. And I guess they are talking about it in some cities and trying to move forward in that fashion.
Do you think that was mainly why they was against human manure? Like, because most diets consist of like meat versus like vegetables and
That's
fruit.
what I'd always heard. Yes, is that it was like, just when, say you have a deer carcass and you've gotten everything you can off of it and you're throwing away the waste. Anything like that, or dairy, or yes, omnivore or carnivore waste, I had always heard had to have a 7-year cycling process before it would be safe to grow foods consumed by humans. I had always wondered about that though, because animals seem to be able to eat it and they didn't ever have to worry about it. And so it's been a question in my mind, and it was really interesting to see it discussed so openly and even being explored by our own government when they're so hesitant to many times look into these ancient practices that very much have validity today. Seeing it's already being explored is, I think, really exciting, because the way that we collect and store and process human waste is just disgusting. I had a college professor that really opened my eyes to the thought process. And he said, water is one of the 3 main ingredients of life. And we're taking our water and we're contaminating it with our own waste. Why would that ever be the choice, right? And then also knowing that things like our soil depletion is just being more and more rapidly a problem. The soil depletion is tons and thousands and thousands and thousands of tons daily. From my understanding, we are losing all of this topsoil. So why wouldn't we turn to every source? I had just thought it would take that 7 years, and I saw that as being part of the problem, having to store, and you want to keep, oh my gosh, my words are just struggling tonight. You want to keep turning and maneuvering that compost pile, whatever the components are. The more you're able to manipulate it, the more you're able to turn it, the faster it will decompose. And so they would have been having to store all this human waste as well as keep it turning. And I saw that as being a big negative as my mind was trying to work out how we could utilize this stuff. And here it is, not even a problem. We simply need to set up our systems in order to accommodate this thought process, which is in part turning our minds around to being open to the thought process as a start, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, you got to be careful sometimes because as one of my mentors, he was talking about the 600-pound barrier, when people thought that the human body just couldn't lift more than 600 pounds. And there was all this scientific studies and everything that, was just confirming it, until basically a trick was played on a dude and he lifted more than 600 pounds.
Wow.
Now, all of a sudden, since the barrier was broken, now they're about up to 700 pounds.
That's amazing. Almost 1,000 pounds, almost a half a ton. That's insane. Yeah, your mind is pretty amazingly powerful, and our bodies are also more powerful than we're led to believe, right? Very neat. Another thing that we are going to be able to implement here, and this was the duh moment for me, why haven't I looked to see if the ink in my Brother printer will be able to be broken down into my soil? I just threw away a ton of paper that I was just so upset about. It hurts my heart. Plus, I love the written word. So even though I'm like, I absolutely have no more need for this, it was really hard for me to throw it away. So today, now I know I didn't need to throw it away because I looked it up. If you have a home printer, I encourage you to look up the brand of ink that you're using to see if it's water or soy based. And if it is, and it's not just a solid printed paper like this one here, this is too much. We don't want to put this into our garden. But this is not too much. So if I didn't need this anymore, I could shred this up and add it to my garden. Some of the things that they talked about that you want to avoid are large clumps of these papers. You basically want to get that in and work it before it's even wet. Work that in and spread it around so that it doesn't mat back up when it gets wet and turn back into essentially another paper surface that your roots can't get through. It has great water retention. It'll absolutely be one of the components that we can utilize in CR's mix as a replacement to the rice hulls or sphagnum moss. The clay pellets are a little bit different. That's more like our water logs, our water batteries, like that other YouTuber described. The water, the sphagnum moss, the rice hulls, the shredded paper is going to be more accessible to the plants in the soil right away. Whereas in those big logs and in those clay pellets, that is going to take a little more work on the part of the soil and the plants to take that water out, which is good. You have different stages. You have your soil components that lose the water the quickest. The plants suck it up from there, and the evaporation happens there the most quickly. Then you have your sphagnum moss, which retains it just a little bit better than the rice hulls, which retain it better than the soil. And so you have like 3 levels of retention there where your plants can access more water. Paper mulch will absolutely work in place of something like rice hulls, sphagnum moss, and the, oh goodness, I'm trying to think of in the Mel's mix, it's peat moss and vermiculite. Those are just some really specific pieces. The vermiculite and the peat moss will tend to hold it more like the sphagnum moss. So I don't know if it would really work quite the same way as vermiculite or the peat moss would, in the same ways that it'll work in the CR's mix, because we're trying for a different thing there. We want that to biodegrade. Then we add a little bit more in with our soil each year for the water retention and the additional types of nutrients in that decomposition process. The peat moss and the vermiculite don't break down as quickly, especially the vermiculite. I do believe the peat moss will eventually break down into its base component. The vermiculite, it's just going to kind of at most keep like crumbling into smaller and smaller pieces of itself. It really isn't the same kind of material where it biodegrades in the same way. It's a type of rock. So it can get into finer and finer molecules of what it is, but it's not going to return to the base elements of what vermiculite is without some other sort of process. Something like lava would take it back to its base elements, and then it could be reformed into whatever it was, whether it was vermiculite or some other substance. Okay, I did post a lot of great material for you guys to tear through. I really try to find unique and interesting pieces, and I encourage you to go and take a peek at it. This one was really neat. Any of you gentlemen, especially that really love tools and machinery, you should definitely watch this little YouTube video. It was neat to watch them machine, and I won't give it away if you haven't watched it yet, the piece that they're building. And oh my gosh, what a brilliant idea. I had a totally different thought process of what the end result was going to be, and what they created was much more intelligent, already above what I had pictured, which would have been superior to anything I had known previously for this particular machining type of a process. Really fun to watch. They actually build the machine, and then they show you how it can be utilized in the garden at your farmer levels, whether you're huge or smaller as a full farm. I think this piece would be very valuable. It would be too much for my little residential property. If they had a smaller variation, I'm going to be hopefully investing in a little mini excavator, and we want to probably try to get one of those types of tractors that you can have multiple tools that you can change out. If they had this type of tool for that mini X, oh my gosh, I would be all over it. It's beautiful. I love it. Check it out. Watch how they make all the individual components for this nice, huge piece of machinery. I'm not as into the big pieces of machinery. They do have their place though, and I think this is a really valuable one. So definitely worth watching. A lot of fun, and I learned a lot about the machining process. Actually, questions that I'd always had in my mind and never really taken the time to explore were answered by this video. It was really neat. Let's head into the collectively rewilding, because there are some other pieces that are pinned here. This is one I'm really excited hearing about. I've talked to you guys about the land bridges in India and how I think that we should bring that here, and California just did it. And not only that, according to this article, I'd have to research it, India's been doing it for a while, and that's an entire country under one like budget and ideology. California does have a pretty darn big budget though, and they definitely have an environmentally based ideology. They are claiming to have the world's biggest wildlife crossing, and this is a mock-up of it. Not necessarily going to be complete until 2026, hopefully at the earliest at the projected time. And it's just going to be massive. So really interested in seeing how that turns out for California. I want to encourage my town here in Utah to do something on a much smaller scale. Right here where we live, there are dead deer, skunks, raccoons. I I'm sure eventually we'll see a coyote. You know, it's sad. I don't want to see that. And if we put a little land bridge, or perhaps I would love to see an underground passage attempted, because that would be, I think, a little bit more cost effective. I'm definitely not certain about that, and I want to do some research before I approach the town. However, I think that this is a viable alternative that we should look into across the nation in our heavily trafficked areas to try to provide routes for our wildlife, because we're seeing them die, and sometimes different areas are cut off from their counterparts, and you have problems for bigger creatures like mountain lions and moose that are trying to breed, and their population is getting more inbred because they're limited from their territory. There's a whole lot of pieces to this. And so I really encourage you all to look into this and start having a conversation. If you live in one of those heavily trafficked areas, just start talking to your friends and family about it. That's the base beginning of anything. And then if it starts taking traction, perhaps your city or town council will hear about it and pursue some thoughts on their own. You can always take it to a city or town council meeting and introduce the idea. I would encourage you to come in here and grab all the research that we're doing, talk to us about it. We'd love to support you if you ever want to try to initiate these types of movements in your region. These are positive things that it doesn't matter what your political ideology is. We all have to worry about the bottom line. Do I think that that should be our overriding decision-making criteria? No. A fictitious, non-gold standard-based currency to me does not seem like it should decide whether or not we continue to have a healthy planet. However, that is the reality that we live in. So we need to look at, again, realistic, logical solutions that aren't going to cause huge deficits for our regions, that instead drive economic growth while pushing towards a healthier future. That really is the true solution with the way our country views fiscal solvency and environmentalism. Let's stop being so opposed to each other, and let's look for ways to more healthily interact with our planet that don't cost too much and that drive our economy in a positive way. Win, 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 right? All right, guys. I think we're pretty well winding down on a lot of the things that I was hoping to talk to you about. Benny did throw up a question here. I'm sorry, Benny, I missed that. How does human manure composting reduce environmental pollution compared to flushing waste? Well, in order to gather the human waste in a more urbanized setting, I would guess there would have to be at least some water involved. However, that would then just go into the human manure itself and not be lost in the same way. It wouldn't have to be processed and bleached and chemicalized in our water treatment systems. So that's a huge part of it. Also, when we take something like, yes, our excrement, and we just throw it into a waste, or we process it until it's considered safe to put back into the water systems, or whatever it is that they're doing in each different case, you lose all the nutritive quality that was in there. Why do we use cow manure? Why do we use chicken manure? Because that stuff has nutrients in it. Our bodies need and eliminate nutrients. So when we go through these chemical processing plants, we lose all of that nutritive quality, and you also lose the addition that it could have been to the soil. There's chemicals being utilized there that are negative and have negative consequences, and you lose that nutritive quality, the soil, the excess amounts of water that are used. I would use the most minimal amount of water possible if I were the one designing the system, to just simply move it to the place where it was then. I haven't had a chance to fully look through this. I don't know how much they process it. I know that urea, when used from our human urine and then pasteurized, it goes through a heating process. So I need to look into this more to be able to best answer your question. But my guess would be that it would go through some sort of at least mildly heating process before then becoming available as human manure. I don't know, though. That still shouldn't take a chemical processing portion, though. It should all be more natural processes. If we are utilizing that waste, all of those chemicals that were used to process it, all of that water that was used to process it can be eliminated, and we turn it into soil. Doesn't take all of these chemicals to turn it into soil. we're losing our topsoil. So that's going to replenish huge amounts of our topsoil. I mean, just as we're losing thousands of tons a day, we're creating thousands of tons a day of a waste, I promise you. It really is one of the larger possibilities on the table to make a huge difference in a lot of different ways environmentally, as well as, again, providing an economic piece that can be utilized to grow our economy. The creation of systems to handle it, then the processing plant that would be a part of it in one way or another. Those are jobs. Figuring out how to deal with the smell of it for the people that are handling those processes. My God, that's another industry possibly. Then getting it back out to be utilized by the agricultural community and the residential community. The education that it would take, that's another job out there. So many pieces could benefit from this, really, in my opinion, Benny. Oh, really? Anita says Utah and Colorado are also utilizing land bridges. I wasn't aware of that. There's a new one between Durango and Pagosa Springs, apparently. And there's a trail camera set up on one in Utah. Oh, thank you, Mom. I appreciate that. It's on the Utah Fish and Game website, apparently. That is so beautiful. Has anybody ever heard if they've ever tried to do an underpass? I'm really curious if that would work, or if the animals would just be too scared. I would think it would have to be on the shorter situations where they could actually see the land on the other side and have a reason to venture through. I do think that would be less costly, though, as a prospect. I'm not sure about that either, though. Go ahead,
Sabrina.
Yes.
So they do have underpasses in a lot of places. I don't know about in Utah, but over by between Ridgeway and Montrose, where there's a massive amount of roadkill from deer, they have built big culverts, and they have deer fencing that the deer cannot jump, and they funnel them to those culverts, and they can cross. They'll get down on their knees. They'll get down on their knees and go through those crossings. So
that's amazing that they would go that far to utilize it. Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. Thank you, Mom. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Anita. That's
sure.
Amazing. It just makes me so happy to know that these things are being implemented. We should learn from each other all across the world where solutions are working. Anita did share another piece with me, and I had mentioned that I'm a little leery about it. It was in regards to violets being planted in huge amounts. And let me just pull up that article for you guys really quickly. I didn't even get a chance to tear through it. I just saw the overall ideology of it. And it's so pretty in thought, right? Oh, let's go plant a bunch of beautiful purple flowers. However, I really hesitate when I don't see a lot of small studies backing up the thought process. They're introducing just one species from what it looks like here. And I may have pulled it up further because I thought it said something about violets, 50,000 violets. And maybe I'm getting, no, here we go. Okay, they are native. I didn't see that. That's really helpful. However, that's just going to put a preponderance of one type of plant into this area when it will have been thousands of types of plants that are naturally there. And when they're doing things like this in such large swaths without the experimentation in small test subject areas first, they're finding that it is not actually working the way that they wanted it to. There was a study where they put out 4 different kinds of trees in this forest to try to help reforest it. But in reality, there were 20, 30, 50 different kinds of species in various levels in this forest. And when they put out these only 4, it almost destroyed the forest wildlife because it was too many of these specific 4 types of trees. So we really need to be cautious about large overarching efforts unless we've done some serious study in test areas. Think about it. If you're going to dye your hair, what do? They tell you, pull your sleeves back and do a little test area on your skin because you don't want that all over your head if you have an allergic reaction to it. Well, our forests and our wildlife can have essentially allergic style reactions to our programs if we don't really look into what it is that we're doing. There's never just one species that we should be concentrating on. I don't think it's wrong in a conservation effort to highlight some certain species that are maybe key to that habitat or that really engender the public support, perhaps. But when we're actually implementing solutions, we should never focus on one species, one plant style. From whether you're thinking trees to ground cover to plants, there's variety in everything that we do. And if you focus on these monoculture solutions, I'm afraid they're not going to have the outcomes that they are purporting. And so that's why this bridge idea is so beautiful, because it did get explored before being implemented on such large scale efforts throughout the world. I have already been hearing about the success that India was experiencing for 2 decades, probably, with their land bridges. Now, Anita's telling us not only are underpasses a viable opportunity, but the animals will crawl. I mean, really picture a bunch of deer army crawling it through a tunnel to get to the other side. That's so impressive that animals will work like that with us, whether they realize it or not, towards a solution to their future. I just think it's so beautiful. I really am so excited. Another piece we should probably just pop up here really quickly, getting out some pieces. If you haven't started your garden yet, there's a great article here, May Isn't Too Late to Start Your Garden. And I really like that they're breaking it down by growing zones. They had a little paragraph for each of the major growing zone regions. And it had, I don't know, maybe 10 plants in it. Go out and get it started. You're not too late. And Miss Tammy shared another article like that with us today. 15 flowers to plant in May for beautiful blooms all summer long. So if you're like me, which I'm not going to get the chance this year, but perhaps you have the chance, don't feel like it's too late. You can definitely get out there and still do some gardening. So a couple of different articles for you guys to check out. I might have shared this cute little video again. It's another gardener that I've started watching on YouTube. I don't know that we'll feature him, but he is interesting, and I like his upbeat spirit and his down-to-earth method of talking with everyone. And look, I had shared, I thought I had seen it, Tammy. We both shared it today. How funny.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, oh, she posted it already.
I'm not finding it. Let me just pull up my YouTube here. This gentleman is somebody that's worth keeping an eye on. For those of you who like these YouTube gardeners, they're just so wonderful, really. Here we go. Let's go to my history over here.
Every spring, a familiar claim starts circulating.
Oh, this is it. Oh, I'm being so silly. I did post it in there.
What's grown on, gardeners? It's May 1st, and by now,
3 easy perennials that make big harvests in May. Not that you'll be able to harvest them this May, but if you get them established this year, every May going forward, you'll start having a harvest. He talks about strawberries, blueberries, and blackberries. I love all of the berries. They really do establish themselves and create harvests year after year after year. I already have a volunteer blackberry we've talked a little bit about. I intend to have raspberries, blueberries. I would love to have elderberries. There are so many more berries than we hear about or see in our grocery stores. And you can definitely explore gooseberries. Those are some of the more common, uncommon berries, elderberries and gooseberries, huckleberries. There are so many berries. And for those of you looking to make a profit off of a very small amount of space, I did share another video for you in our new featured content creator, Gardenary. So cute. I love her channel name. And that is about making small spaces and making money from them. And one of the common suggestions, and one that I believe that she made in this video, is that of berries. They're in high demand. They're very fragile. They don't transport well, so you do need to tend to get them at a more local source whenever possible, and they're high dollar. So definitely berries are a way to go if you have limited space, you want to make a profit. And you're really actually ready for just prolific amounts of produce from a small area. Excellent, excellent opportunity. And so those are some things to take you forward into this May growing month. Anybody have any news in their garden? Anybody doing anything in the gardening world yet? Uh-oh. Are we all as struggling as I am? Not yet for Benny. Are you guys still pretty cold? Is it still a warning of frost danger probably in Massachusetts, Benny? It's been cold at night. We're seeming to be past it here, but yes, we can have, oh really, but humid. That's interesting. Cold and humid. That's not the normal combination one hears about, right? I bet you if it's humid and it's cold, it's really cold. Did you have something to say, Anita?
No, just I haven't decided whether I'm going to put a garden in yet or not.
Well, you could always come up here and I could put a bunch of mills mixed together for you. You could throw in your containers.
That's true. I'll
Be a
have to
lot
think
easier
about
work,
it.
right? Where you guys are so busy and it's not your big passion, that you could do it
Right,
and have the enjoyment of it, but not a lot of labor and not a lot of time.
right. Something I'll have to keep in mind.
Definitely.
Good excuse to come see you guys.
It would be anytime. So the girls love going around and doing things with you guys because we're always so busy.
All right.
All right. And then Kindes, did you have any gardening going on?
Yeah, I'm speculating what I do have planted that was unlabeled is actually broccoli.
Oh, fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's a cooler weather one, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Brussels sprouts, kale, arugula, lettuces, radishes, onions. Those are all great crops for this time of year. Absolutely.
Well, we have a lot of wild onions here. I think in Georgia in general.
I think they probably have them just about everywhere, but I'm sure that anything that there could be, there's more of it in your area, right? Tammy did post another piece for us today as well. I think in Collectively Rewilding Home about ransoms. It's a wild onion, and they're neat. I know that we have something at least like them in Colorado, some wild onions. Let's see if I can find that for you here. Let's see, let's go to the overall and we'll search for it. And so these are things that's weird. I wonder why it's that.
You know, we get a lot of wild onions and wild strawberries. It's just like, where'd those come from? Little baby strawberries.
Yes, we have a lot of wild strawberries in the Colorado mountains as well. Interesting. I know that okay, I had to take off the S. So this is what I guess she did it yesterday. Foraging for wild onions, known as ramson, wild leek, wood leek, or wild garlic. These Allium trichocum, and they're pretty tasty. I have had them a time or two. So definitely something to look for when you're out and about in that natural area. All right, guys. Oh, and I jumped away just too quickly. Let's go and look at Thursday's class. I just can't keep it straight in my head yet. So we'll be back together on Thursday, May 8th at 7:30 p.m. Pacific, 8:30 p.m. Mountain, 9:30 p.m. Central, and 10:30 p.m. Eastern. Hope to see you all there. Definitely, if you come along any kinds of questions during the next couple of days, jot them down. Definitely love to answer those questions. You guys come up with some really interesting things that we've got to go and find the answer for. And that's what it's all about. Yes, definitely yummy, Benny. Those ransoms, they look so good. I love onions now. I hated onions as a child, but oh my goodness, anymore? They're some of the best stuff for flavor. All right, guys. Thank you all so much for coming. Please feel free to unmute your mic and say goodnight, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Everybody.
guys.
Good night.
night,
Thank you, Vanessa, and everyone. Good to see
Good
you
night,
all.
Sabrina.
Princess. Everybody have a wonderful evening. Thanks, Mom.
Good night.
Night, guys.